This month, we're asking for your support through our premium programs via the Escapist Plus and YouTube memberships. Your support allows us to continue making the content we want instead of chasing algorithms or the latest trends. Plus, you get a bunch of perks like ad-free viewing via the Escapist Plus on our main website, early access on YouTube via YouTube memberships, and bonus content like our monthly Ask the Creators video series where we answer your burning questions. Thanks in advance for your continued support. It genuinely means the world to us. The past couple of decades have been largely defined by the idea of the shared universe, as exemplified by the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The idea is that entertainment companies can bring together established properties and anchor them to one another in a way that encourages audience investment to buoy the less popular properties through brand loyalty. This is how Marvel Studios turned what was effectively a bunch of B-list characters into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise.
I'm Ant-Man. Ant-Man? What, you haven't heard of me? No, you wouldn't have heard of me.
Of course, Marvel Studios were far from the first studio to come up with the idea of a shared universe tying separate properties together, having imported the concept directly from the comics. One can trace the roots back even further to the crossover monster movies of the 1930s.
In a half an hour, the moon will rise and I'll turn into a wolf.
You and 20 million other guys.
However, while these sorts of crossovers were not entirely uncommon on television and even in film cameos, Marvel Studios used its shared universe as a platform to an unprecedented level of success. Other companies rushed to emulate this model by integrating their own properties into similar shared universes. The DC Extended Universe, the X-Men Cinematic Universe, the Dark Universe, the Hasbro Cinematic Universe, the Rubik's Cube Shared Universe. And no, I'm not making that last one up. It goes without saying that even the few that managed to get started struggled to match the popularity and success of Marvel's enterprise. In many cases, studios succeeded when they weren't trying to copy Marvel's model. However, recent years have suggested that the shared universe may no longer be the ideal model for this sort of brand management. Instead, companies are pushing towards the idea of a multiverse, connected sets of worlds defined by infinite possibilities and permutations. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is perhaps the most high-profile recent example, but it's not the only illustration of the concept. The CW, for example, tied together a wealth of disconnected DC-related properties in its big crossover Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Holy crimson skies of death!
As the market leader, it's no surprise that Marvel Studios are also signaling strongly in that direction. The multiverse was seeded, even as a red herring in plot terms, in Spider-Man Far From Home.
I'm sorry, you're saying there's a multiverse?
The subtitle of the second Doctor Strange movie is In the Multiverse of Madness. It will feature Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda Maximoff, suggesting ties to WandaVision, which recently introduced Evan Peters from the as-yet unconnected X-Men movies. The animated streaming series What If will feature the Watcher watching over the multiverse. It isn't just Marvel embracing this model. Warner Bros.' upcoming Flash-centric movie is confirmed to be a, let's face it, likely loose, adaptation of the comic Flashpoint, and will see Michael Keaton reprising the role of Batman from the Tim Burton films of the 80s and 90s. This will mean that there are 3 live-action versions of Batman working on DC projects simultaneously. Ben Affleck in Zack Snyder's Justice League and Flashpoint, Michael Keaton in Flashpoint and presumably Beyond, possibly Batman Beyond, am I right? And Robert Pattinson in Matt Reeves' The Batman, and its own, and I quote here, new Batman universe. Building on the success of non-shared universe projects like Joker, Warner Bros. Are reportedly splitting their production along 2 lines, the DC Extended Universe and the DC Films Multiverse. Apparently, films in that multiverse can also have spin-offs, tie-ins, crossovers, and sequels. I don't think anyone else has ever attempted this, claimed DC Films president Walter Hamada in an interview with the New York Times, but audiences are sophisticated enough to understand it. If we make good movies, they will go with it. Hamada may be just a little disingenuous here. What the multiverse really allows for is a scaling down of shared universe continuity and the opportunity for recasting, reinventing, and rebooting. It's effectively a return to the old pre-Marvel Cinematic Universe model where reiterations of familiar brands didn't have to be tethered to continuity baggage. Of course audiences understand this. They understood that Adam West, Michael Keaton, Kevin Conroy, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, and Christian Bale could all be Batman in different movies. It's film watching 101. At its most basic level, the multiverse is just a formal constraint placed on this older style of blockbuster production. In an era where fans are increasingly obsessed with continuity and fidelity, the multiverse is effectively a fig leaf that allows for the operation of the industry machinery behind the curtain. It's no coincidence that Marvel Studios introduced the multiverse right at the point where many of the original cast members, such as Robert Downey Jr. or Chris Evans, are departing the franchise. More cynically, this model allows the studios to have their cake and eat it. A shared universe allows different characters from different films in the same continuity to come together, as in the Avengers franchise. But a multiverse allows for the potential of multiple iterations of the same character to come together, each iteration coming with its own nostalgic fanbase. Consider, for example, the rumors that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield will be reprising their roles as Peter Parker with Tom Holland in Spider-Man 3. Meanwhile, the Japanese Spider-Man is waiting by his phone. Quick sidebar here. Tom Holland has clarified that, as far as he's aware, neither Garfield nor Maguire will be appearing in Spider-Man 3. This conflicts with reports placing actors in and around the film's Atlanta sets. Of course, it is entirely possible that Holland is telling the truth, and that rumors of appearances from Garfield and Maguire are mere puff, setting us up for the surprise triumphant return of the Jack Black Spider-Man from the MTV Movie Awards.
Make out with me, you will.
It is also possible that Holland has become fluent in the art of lying to the press about blockbuster properties, a necessary survival skill in a modern Hollywood driven by spoiler phobia. Marion Cotillard very famously swore that she was not going to be playing Talia al Ghul in The Dark Knight Rises, despite the fact that she was very much playing Talia al Ghul in The Dark Knight Rises. However, it is also possible that Holland simply doesn't know that Garfield and Maguire are in the movie with him. Holland has a reputation as a notorious spoiler for these films. More to the point, Holland joked that he'd been shooting the film for 8 weeks and still had no idea what it was about. While he's likely just being charming and conversational, it's worth noting that the nature of Marvel's production means that actors frequently shoot scenes without context and without knowing their scene partners. Gwyneth Paltrow famously didn't know that she was in Spider-Man: Homecoming. On her first day on set, Brie Larson didn't even know what movie she was shooting. Actors are frequently given incomplete or false scripts to prevent leaks or spoilers. As such, it's entirely possible for an actor shooting a Marvel film to have no idea what they're shooting, who they're starring with, or what their movie's about. But that's probably an issue for another video. End sidebar. The embrace of the multiverse also hints at a more fundamental shift in popular culture, and an understanding of what that shift means. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was a triumph of the monoculture. It was ubiquitous and inescapable. Endgame wasn't just a film, it was a collective cultural experience. In some ways, it feels like the perfect 2019 experience. It's something that is, frankly, unimaginable even 2 years later. There's a very serious question about what cinema going will look like after the pandemic, and how film production and distribution will change once things improve. However, there's also a strong sense that the pandemic only accelerated industry trends that were happening anyway. The streaming wars were heating up long before COVID-19. Sure, a press release in October 2020 confirmed that streaming would be Disney's primary focus ahead of the theatrical market, but Disney CEO Bob Chapek insisted the shift was going to happen anyway, and his predecessor Bob Iger had already signaled that Disney Plus was the company's biggest priority in March. In some ways, this restructuring was like Thanos.
I am inevitable.
Even the streaming wars themselves are arguably just accelerating other trends that are fragmenting the monoculture further, such as the emergence of peak television. It's harder for pieces of pop culture to break through in the way that they used to, when there were only 3, or okay, fine, Fox, 4 television networks, and when films could reign at the box office for weeks on end, like some sort of ungodly Celine Dion song. When there's so much film and television to watch available via so many channels, it's hard to keep track of it all. Endgame sold an estimated 93 million tickets, and that's before it hit the home media market and without factoring in later television broadcasts. In contrast, while Disney Plus has reached 86.8 million subscribers, not all of those are subscribing for MCU content. Their interest is split across the company's Pixar, Star Wars, National Geographic, or internationally Star libraries. Despite being structured as a sitcom, WandaVision will never air in syndication. It'll never grow outside of the Disney Plus ecosystem. Critics have spent the past decade declaring the death of the monoculture, whether to mark the end of Game of Thrones or the release of Endgame. While events like the success of Hamilton suggest reports of the monoculture's death have been somewhat exaggerated, a shift clearly is taking place. Netflix doesn't care exactly what everybody watches, just as long as everybody's watching something. Its algorithm is highly personalized and targeted, down to the thumbnail that it picks to appeal to individual viewers. Fun fact, you can tell a lot about how Netflix sees you by looking at the thumbnails that it chooses to show you. The shift towards the multiverse as an ordering principle seems to recognize this new reality. It's no longer enough to offer a single version of Batman that appeals to the largest possible audience. Instead, the ideal is to create a multitude of Batmen, each of whom can appeal to a different section of the larger audience. Even seemingly minor characters like Cyborg can exist in multiple iterations, like Ray Fisher in the DCEU and Jovian Wade in Doom Patrol. There's one for everybody in the audience. As ever, this trend could cut either way. In an ideal world, it might shatter the idea of the canon and allow for more inclusive and experimental storytelling. After all, if there are multiple iterations of these characters running around, studios might be willing to take more risks with one or two of them. It might encourage fans to be less possessive of these characters, or less hostile to alternate interpretations that don't conform to their expectations. Imagine a world where fans don't insist that there's one right way to write Luke Skywalker. On the other hand, it might just serve as another accelerant of the nostalgia consuming pop culture. Why stop at 3 Batman or Spider-Man when you could have an infinite number? More than that, the multiverse might strip these alternate interpretations of any personality to better integrate them with other iterations. It's hard to imagine modern comic book movie fans eagerly embracing the oddness of Batman or the horny energy of Batman Returns, so will Michael Keaton get to play that version of the character, or will all the edges be sanded down so he can better fit in the shared universe? What the future holds, nobody knows. Still, at least there may be multiple futures. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was In the Frame.